Well, hey, Mark, thank you so much for being willing to do this interview. We were just talking earlier, but this has been on my bucket list for a long time. And your music specifically had a significant impact on my family's life, specifically my wife. Her mom was actually going through cancer in 2004, and literally your music got them through and just ministered to them before and after they lost their mom. And literally, we can't think about your ministry and your music without tearing up. And we can't listen to your music either without tearing up, I'll say. But just thank you so much just for your ministry. And, I'm excited to dive into your story and how we got there. But for those who may not be familiar with you, why don't you just give us a brief overview of who you are and what you do?
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Doug. That's kind of you to say. Man, I'm grateful. I grew up in Kansas. I was adopted when I was 2 weeks old, and just got a great family. And I've had a great life. I mean, I always joke that in the town that I grew up, it was a town of 5,000 people. And if you weren't in the paper at least 3 times a week, you probably didn't live there anymore. But I played football. I was a quarterback. I played baseball. I ran track. And basketball. We did it all. And I was kind of a sports person that did some music on the side, And then I got to college and I thought, man, I'm going to be a pitcher, in the pros. And I went to junior college in the same town. And I remember I threw a couple pitches to a guy, and the third pitch he hit so hard, he hit it out into the like center field and put a dent in the scoreboard. And I thought, I need to find another job. This one's not going to work out very well. And so, I just started putting my energy into writing songs, and I'd never done that before. Matter of fact, I didn't even know you could write a song when I was in high school. I just thought the songs are already written and you just performed other people's songs. And one of my instructors said, no, you can actually write your own songs. I was like, oh my gosh, that's cool. So then, I just jumped into that, just jumped into songwriting in college, and got some opportunities to perform. Went to Kansas State University to get a marketing degree so that I could go to Nashville and become a professional waiter. But again, I was doing music there. I went to Nashville, and I have to really thank my parents, because all my other friends in college were going off and getting real jobs, and I did a little concert, and some people came, and I did a song about my grandfather, and it really moved my folks. And I said, hey, instead of getting a job like everybody else, I want to go to Nashville and just give it a try, because at that point in time, I figured I wanted the dream to do music more than I wanted the fear of failure. And so I just thought, I'm just going to give it a try. And so I did. And I tell the story about, I was a waiter in Nashville, and I'm sitting there. My parents come for Thanksgiving, the first Thanksgiving. I've been in Nashville for about 4 months. And I thought I was going to get to town and get a record deal, and it would be great. And I got to town, and I was going nowhere fast. And my parents came. I gave them a tour around town, and right next to the restaurant where I was working, the hotel where I was working, is the Grand Ole Opry, which I've got a picture of here in my office. And I remember my dad just stood in there. He looked at it and he goes, "Is that where my son's going to perform one day?" And I said, "Dad," and it kind of broke my heart, because I knew that it just wasn't going to happen. And I said, "You have to really make it to perform at the Grand Ole Opry, and I just think it's not going to happen." And he put his arm around me, and my mom was standing next to us. He put his arm around me. He said, "No, this is where my son's going to perform one day." Wow. And I was just like, well, the story, it goes on from there. But the end of the story is 6 years later, I did my own show at the Grand Ole Opry, and sold tickets, and it sold out, and I met a youth minister that led me to all that. But there on the second row of the balcony was my mom and my dad, and the curtain came up, and it was packed, and the record company was there that night. And looking back, that was the craziest thing I've ever done. And I'm not sure that was the smartest thing I've ever done, but I got a record deal that night. And it was, wow, a lot of because of my dad just saying, believing that's where my son's going to perform one day. And so thankfully it came true.
Wow. There's so much I want to unpack there. I guess first I would just start, in the beginning of your journey, you said you were adopted, and I know you're extremely passionate about adoption. Can you just talk about that? Why are you passionate about it? How has that impacted your life? We can dive deeper, but I'm just curious, just open-ended there. What would you say?
Yeah, growing up, I never thought of it. Even thought about being adopted. Like when people would say, "Hey, who's adopted here?" and I look around like to see who's adopted. I was like, "Oh, wait a minute, I'm adopted." And
Did
then as I've gotten older,
did you know you were adopted from, did your parents tell you when you were as soon as early as you can remember?
yeah, yeah, I tell the story that my sister and I were going through our baby books. She's a year younger than me. She's not adopted. We're going through our baby books and we're flipping through, and she's got more information in hers than I do in mine. And I told my mom, "Hey, mom, I've got some discrepancies here on my baby book. I need some answers." And I don't think I used the word discrepancy, but she said, "You know what? You're special because you were adopted." And I said, "What does that mean?" And she said, "Well, it means with your brother and your sister, we didn't get to choose them. That's just who God gave us. With you, we get to go pick you out special." And I was like, "Oh man, that feels good." And so as I got older, my sister and I would get in an argument, and on important stuff like who had the cooler tennis shoes. And she would say, "Oh yeah," I remember one time she said, "Oh yeah, well you're not even supposed to be in this family because you're adopted." And then waited for my response, and something on the inside of me began to bloom and kind of smile. And I said, "Yeah, that means mom and dad." That mom and dad get to pick me out special. They just got stuck with you. And
Boom.
so it even makes me laugh to say it now. Maybe it feels good. But I got a great family, and so I didn't think that much about it until I started to do more. Went to Nashville and perform, and at the time, Family Christian Stores had done this, started this advocacy program where they wanted to help out orphans around the world. And they called me and they said, "Hey, we know you were adopted. Would you like to be our spokesperson for adoption?" And I said, "Sure. What do you want me to do?" And they took me to Mexico and they introduced me to just a ton of orphan kids. And they told the story about how these kids, a group came in and said, we're just gonna make these kids hamburgers because they haven't had meat in a long time. There were 25 kids. They made over 100 hamburgers. And at the end of the night, they went to find out where all the hamburgers went, because they were like, "I'm sure these kids haven't eaten four times the amount." And so they followed them, and these kids were taking the hamburgers and they were putting them in between their mattresses in the rooms where they slept. And they said, "Why are you doing that?" And they go, "We don't know when we're going to get meat again. I mean, this is the thing." And I was like, "Oh." So one of the ladies that worked there, she said, "Hey, you can get your face on a poster that says, 'Hey, I believe in adoption and help orphans,' and have them put in stores all over the country for Christian stores." She said, "Or you can do something significant." And she said, I would just ask that you make a dent in this for us and make a dent in it for God." And so I just got this idea, man, what if I get on my bicycle? I just woke up in the middle of the night one night. My wife had just ridden her bike across the country for fun. I don't know why somebody would do that. But anyway, I thought, hey, well, instead of taking a bus, why don't I just leave California and go to Maine and ride my bike all the way across and do concerts along the way. And whatever money we raise, we just give to the organization. And man, sure enough, we did. And 62 days later and $250,000 later, we got to the other side of the country and had raised a chunk of money for those folks. And it was one of the greatest things I've ever done. And from then on, I thought it feels better to be on stage talking about something where I'm not benefiting at all. I'm just helping other people out than it does to stand on stage and say, "Hey, look at me, I'm on stage. And I just did a song and you're clapping for me." There felt something felt different. And people who watched the concerts would say, you sang more passionately and you spoke more passionately than we've ever heard you before. And I thought, oh man, I think that's the key. I think the key is to use your platform to lift others up.
Wow. And I don't remember where this was in your journey, but I'd love for you to share the story. You wrote a song to your birth mom who you never met.
Right.
And I think, wasn't there an older woman who kind of gave you a slap in the face with, can you just tell that whole story of how you came to that song? And if you haven't listened, it's called "Everything to Me." Literally, I turn on and sweep like a baby every single time. And I have to ask you, like, this is the number one question everyone wants me to ask you. Like, one, do you cry when you're writing songs?
You know what's so funny? I was a youth director, and the funniest thing about this is if you were hanging out to me and you said, if somebody in our youth group, you'd say, "What's Mark Schultz like hanging out with?" They would say, like, "He's just crazy and fun." It's just like we're always laughing. And but I think there's something that I show my emotions most through music. You know, I feel safe to put my emotions into music, maybe where I don't walk around with my emotions on my sleeve, just going, hey, can somebody just give me a hug? I just wrote a verse. I just need a hug. Yeah, I wrote a song. I was into about record
Whoa.
3 or
Do you, I just want to, do you cry? I need you to answer this. Do you
oh
cry
oh
when you
oh
write the
when I,
songs?
oh sure, yeah. My favorite thing. So all the songs that you know of mine, I've written in one chapel where I was a youth director at a church, and I've written in one chapel. And I was just sitting there, and there's something about the stories in that chapel. They just kind of fall off the walls. I mean, I'm just in there playing the same music I always play, but then these lyrics come out.
Hmm.
So I'm writing these songs, and I always know I've got something. I don't ever write a full song, like sit down, just write one full song. It's usually I'm writing a melody and some words come to me, and all of a sudden, like the little hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and then, I can just remember that he's my son, letters from war, remember me. The moment that it hit me, and it's like God drops something in your lap, and you just are just like, something just happened, because I'm much different right now than I was 10 seconds ago when I was just
Wow.
sitting in here by myself. And those songs are, there's some songs you can't force. If I forced a song, you probably don't know it, or it's not on a record. But I'll just say this to give you an example of when I write a song, because you asked about it. When I wrote "He's My Son," I tried to write that song for 3 months, and I couldn't write it, and it wasn't that great of a song at all. And then one night I went home, I sat in front of the television, hit the clicker twice, got back in my car and drove to the church. And I sat down, and that's one song that all came out at once. And it was just like, I think God was saying, hey, I'm going to give you 3 months to realize this isn't your song, and then I'm going to give it to you. And then 2 weeks later, we went into the recording studio, and I was sick, I had a cold, and the producer called me and said, we got to record the song tonight. I said, I can't, I'm sick, I can't even sing. And I remember I went there, I got there at midnight, and I was hoarse and I couldn't hardly sing. And the music started playing, and tears just filled my eyes, because it was just the production of it was so good. And I just got to the microphone, I started to whisper the lyrics, and he's like, I'm gonna hit stop, I'm gonna hit record. I don't want you to move it. You just sing it just like that. And I sang it down, and he said, something special happened here.
Wow.
And I don't want to touch anything. I'm just gonna wake up in the morning and hope it's still here. And it was. And so when people say at concerts, I think you wrote "He's My Son," I think you wrote that for me and my son, or me and my daughter, I was like, number one, I didn't write it. But number two, I believe that's true, because I think, again, God waited till I had nothing left, even in the singing of it, and then go, okay, now I'll give it to you. So you know that this isn't from you. This is just for me, and you just get to deliver it. So yes, I do cry. Sometimes I cry when I'm recording too.
And just on that, I'll get back to everything to me. But my understanding is when you went to Nashville, you weren't planning on being a Christian artist, is my understanding, correct? You want to be a country artist, and that didn't really work. I don't know what happened, but I'm just curious. Can you walk us through that journey? And, what was it like to go from wanting to pursue country to being Christian, and just talk about the impact that's made in your life? I'm just curious what that journey looked like.
Yeah, so I grew up in Kansas, so we just listened to pop and country. There was no Christian music in my hometown, so I didn't know what Christian music was. And I remember when I was leaving to go to Nashville, one of the girls that I knew was listening to one of my songs, so I would always sneak into the music building at night and get on the grand piano and play till 2 o'clock in the morning. And she was listening to my songs, and she said, "You know what? I can hear you being a Christian artist." And I was like, "I don't even know what that is."
Huh.
And she said, "It's kind of what you're doing right now, but you're just telling more stories about faith and stuff." And I was like, "I have no idea." And she took me to a Stephen Curtis Chapman concert in Kansas City, and I watched it, and I was like, "Oh, that's awesome!" And afterwards, everybody got in a big circle in the parking lot and prayed afterwards. I was like, "This is really different. I don't know what this is." And so I went to Nashville just thinking, "Hey, I'm gonna do country." Probably because I have a receding hairline, and I can put a country hat, a cowboy hat on, and nobody would know. So, but here's what happens. I remember I was staying in a hotel, and I realized I had no job. I was in Nashville. I wasn't in college anymore. I was a real adult, and I remember praying, "God, I have got myself in a huge pickle here. And if you are real, please show me you're real, because I'm going nowhere so fast, and this was a huge mistake." And I said, "I don't even know how to play the piano." And I joke, I just play the black notes on the piano because there's less of them and they stick up. So 6 months go by, and I'm a waiter at a hotel, and And the first week that I was in town, I got an internship at a place called BMI, which they collect royalties for singers and songwriters when their songs are on the radio. And this girl said, "Man, you're a nut. You need to meet this guy that I know." And I said, "What's his name?" And he said, "Martin." She said, "Martin DeVries." And I said, "Well, who's Martin DeVries?" And she said, "He's a youth minister, and I worked in his youth group." And I was like, "There's absolutely no way I'm hanging out with that guy, because he's going to make me hang out with kids, and I'm going to, I'm allergic to him, so I'm not going to do it." So she gave me his number, and I ripped it up into pieces and I threw it in the trash can. And then another 6 months go by, and I'm again just having a tough time. And they told me at the hotel, if nobody comes in by noon, you can go home. And I was the last one to work, and I just thought, this is great. I just want to go home on Saturday, and I'll probably go back home to Kansas because I'm going nowhere. And this couple comes through the door, and they wanted to eat, and I was like, "Oh, you got to be kidding me! I was this close to locking the doors." Anyway, they came and they ate. When I brought them their food, there was a hot pepper on this guy's plate, and he said, "Hey, man, waiter, I want to see how tough you are." And I was like, "Okay, weirdo." And he cut it in half, and he gave me, I think, the other half of the hot pepper. And we're eating them. And he said, "Whoever drinks my water first loses." And he put his water on the table. And we ate our hot peppers. And he looked at me, and I looked at him. His face turned red, and mine turned red. And his lips started to shake, and mine started to shake. And he was sweating. I started to sweat. And so I picked up his water and drank it. And then I drank as much water. And he's like, "Man, you're crazy. What is your name?" I said, "Mark," and he said, "You must be pretty smart if your name's Mark." And I said, "You must be a Mark too." And he asked me what I was in town to do. I said, "Make it in the music business." And I said, "What's your name?" He said, "Mark DeVries." And I said, "Oh my gosh,
Wow.
there's 1 million people in Nashville, and I was supposed to call you 6 months ago because I met a friend of yours who said I was supposed to." And he just looked at me, and his wife just looked at me like, "Are you kidding me?" And he said, "Do you like snow skiing?" And I said, "No." And he goes, "Why don't you go snow skiing with me?" I said, "Okay." And I ended up he just didn't tell me I was going to take 15 seventh graders on a ski trip. And we got to Paley Peaks, Indiana, the mecca of all great skiing. And we got there at midnight, and the kids jump out of the van, and they said, "Mr. Schultz, can we have some Mountain Dew?" And I said, "Yes," because I'm a moron. And the kids drank all the Mountain Dew and spent the next 5 hours just running circles inside the cabin. I said, "Hey, y'all, let's go to bed. We don't have to get up till 6, but let's go to bed." So at 6 o'clock, I get up, my alarm goes off, and I can't move, and everybody in the room's laughing. And I'm like, "What? I think I had a seizure from these kids. I really am allergic." And the light came on, and I realized the reason they were laughing is because when I was sleeping between 5 and 6, they were duct taping me to the bed. And so,
Beautiful.
yeah. So anyway, I stayed with them. The great thing is this youth minister, Martin DeVries, stayed there for 30 years as the youth minister for this church. And he just mentored me, and I came on board as a youth director, and he would just be like, "Hey, why don't you write a song for this kid? His dad's having a tough time. He's got cancer. His son has cancer. He's my son." Or "Remember me? We're going around and visiting all the college students, and you're going to come with me in the car, and we're just going to go, every college student that we've ever had go through our program, we're going to go to their college and visit them." And I wrote "Remember Me" in the car, for those. So anyway, I told you that earlier story about playing at the Grand Ole Opry. I did concerts, and he would say, "Hey, write a song about this, write a song about this." And I kept writing these songs, and the kids would keep asking for the songs. And I did a concert at the church, and then I did another one, and it was even bigger. And a lady said, "Hey, you should do a show at the Ryman Auditorium." And she was kidding, and I didn't know it. So I called the Ryman Auditorium, and I said, "I need to book a concert for Mark Schultz." And they said, "Who are you?" And I said, "Mark Schultz." And they go, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm a youth director at a church." And they go, "Well, you just can't call and book your own concert." And they said, "Is it a benefit concert?" And I said, "Yeah, it's for me. Benefiting me." So I showed up, and the reason why I say it was so special is right before I thought, this is maybe my last chance. I just want to give it a shot, and if it doesn't work out, I'll go back to Kansas knowing I gave it my best shot. And the record company wasn't interested in really coming, but they owned the Ryman Auditorium, and once they heard that I was doing a concert, they decided to come. And nobody was there at the beginning. There holds 2,500 people, and about 300 people are in their seats. And I got to go on stage almost, and they said, "Hold on, they're letting out a couple football games. We're going to see if more people come." And Mark DeVries, the youth minister, came out before me and looked around, and he came back in. He said, "You about ready to go out?" He didn't tell me anything. And I said, "Yeah." I said, "There's not very many people out there, and it's maybe not going to work." But I said, "At least I gave it my best shot." And he smiled and gave me a hug, prayed for me. And I'm standing, this gets me every time. I'm standing backstage, and he's in the front, and he's talking to the audience. And he said, "The reason we're here tonight is because there was a kid from Kansas who had a dream when he came to Nashville, and he surrounded himself with people who were just crazy enough to believe it might come true. Wow. Welcome to Mark Schultz at the Ryman." And the crowd, just is full. It's packed, and my mom and dad are sitting on the front row. And it wouldn't have happened had I not run into him, and I wouldn't have run into him had I not prayed the night that I got there and felt like I made a huge mistake and said, God, if you're real, you got to show me and show me in some way that you're real. And he put a Martin DeVries in my life, who's a mentor to me, and I still talk to and run with a couple times a week.
Wow. Yeah, and you wrote a song about him, which is amazing.
Yeah, I wrote, that's Ben. You know a lot of the tunes. Then that's a newer one for sure.
So good. You talked a little bit about, you said you were writing songs in a chapel. Do you have a process for writing your songs? Is everyone different? Yeah, I know you said a lot of times God will drop something in your heart. It sounds like Mark DeVries is really the mastermind and gives you all the songs to write. Is that?
Yeah. At the beginning, it was the pressure of, hey, we have the kids are graduating and we need a song for Youth Sunday, or we had a thing called Jesus Jeans and Beans, which is the kickoff Sunday at the beginning of the year where kids wear their jeans in the church and it's real laid back. And I wrote a song called I Am the Way, one of my first songs I ever wrote. And so he would just say, hey, we need a song for this, we need a song for that. And then I love that because that kind of puts the when you're driving down the highway and you can see that there's rails on the side of the road, and I got to stick with this theme, and you can't get outside of because I'm the kind of guy that would just keep taking different roads and different until I'm off onto a song that nobody's ever thought of before. I just love that. And so it really helps. But for me, I'll go into the chapel and I'll sit down there and I'll write something, and I have to get out of my thinking brain, and I just have to write until something else takes over. And then you're in a creative process that you're not thinking anymore. And I think that's where God can do some work. And then I'll say a phrase, and then I heard, funny enough, before this podcast I went on, and I was listening to your podcast about your 2021 recap podcast.
Yeah.
And I got to go back to episode 297 and listen to how to do my end of year thing. But I heard you talk about a song on there before you call me home, and
yes,
that was an example of me just sitting there and I was just playing, and all of a sudden I started singing "Before You Call Me Home," and something happened. It was like, oh my gosh, that's beautiful. And I just put it on my tape recorder and I just recorded it, and I said, we'll come back and figure out what that song's about later. So a few months later, I came back and listened to it, and I go, now I've got to make sense of what that song was all about. But usually it's just that, and as long as I've got a great melody and the hook of the song, then I can go, okay, man, then you can get on that thing and ride it as far as you possibly can. The hardest is a great melody, and you're trying to figure out what that melody is about, and sometimes that takes a long time.
Do you have a favorite song or a handful of songs that are your favorites, or are they all basically like your babies? You love them all?
Yeah, my favorite's always the last one I wrote.
Yeah.
I put them out there, and they're like kids. You just hope they go out in the world and make a living, and then send home checks, and and support their dad. There's always a handful of them that I just know are special, and so whether that's the one you were talking about earlier, man, here's what makes them special. Makes them special when they go out and they have a life of their own, and then people tell me the stories about how this had an impact. So whether it's with your mother-in-law or the song I wrote for, and now I'm just realizing you asked me about it, and I just went off on another song. So Everything to Me, the song I wrote about my adoption, I wrote with a girl who I've written a few songs with, and she had just had like her second or third baby. And it was like a couple months after, and I said, I got this song about writing to my birth mom. And so I sat down at the piano and I said something like, must have felt your tears when they took me from your arms. And I still remember she had her notebook, and her eyes just rolled up in the back of her head, and she just rolled over, and she was in the church pew, and she just went sideways, and she like she was pretending to pass out. She was like, I just gave birth to a baby, and giving a baby up for adoption seems like my head is about to explode, And so we just sat down, and that song just really came out quickly. And at the end of the day, the song was about, hey, I just want to tell my birth mom, though I've never met her, man, when you gave me up, you gave everything to me. I've had a great life. And the line in there, the second verse about, man, when you were making the choice whether you're going to have me or not, or have an abortion, were you thinking about what my life was going to be like? Were you thinking about me getting married, Whew. And my wife walking down the aisle,
Hmm.
And I just paint the picture of what that looked like. And it was that what you were thinking about. And there's a line in there that says, if I saw you on the street, would you know that it was me? Would your eyes be blue or green like mine? Would we share a warm embrace? Would you know me in your heart, or would you smile and let me walk on by? Um, and the last part of that is, I just hope you'd be proud of who I am. Man, I cry in interviews too. I write when I cry when I write it, I cry to record it, and I cry to interview. But I think those are the things that now that I'm a dad, and we've adopted two girls. We've adopted a girl from China, and we've adopted a girl from not only here in the United States, but from the same state, the same town, and the same adoption agency that I came from.
Wow.
And so to see that from the other side and be the dad of adopted kids, and then I sing those words, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, that's full circle for me. I get to see the whole story.
Yeah. When you were performing here in Pittsburgh, and I'm sure you share this a lot, you just talked about your wife has this phrase that you catch on to, just, we're all in, I'm all in. And you talked about that, when it came to adoption. Can you just speak to people listening to this about, specifically around adoption, but what does it mean to be all in? And, what advice do you have for those who may be listening to this, who maybe have never considered adoption, maybe now they would, or that are considering adoption? What would you tell them about being all in?
Yeah, I just think, number one, I've had a lot of friends who maybe couldn't have a child, maybe have had a child, and they thought maybe we could adopt too, because there's so many. I mean, your options are limitless when it comes to adoption, because there's just so many options. And I think the one thing that holds people back is fear. And I see it over and over again. And if there's one person that shouldn't have been afraid to adopt anybody, it would be me, because I'm adopted, and I just feel like that's part of my story. So when my wife said, "Hey, let's adopt," and she was like, "We got to go." And I said in the concert as well, I said, "Look, the people who made the biggest impact in my life have been the people that said I'm in," and that was my mom and dad when they adopted me. My mom, when they're getting ready to adopt me, for the people that don't know the story, but my mom, I said, "Tell me the story." My mom said, "Well, we looked at you. You were 2 weeks old in the crib. I looked at you, and I looked at your dad, and I looked at you, and I go, well, what do you think?" And I looked at your dad. He just looked at you, and he goes, "I'm in." And 23 years later, I go to Nashville, and the people that I live next door to are Henry and Liz. Liz grew up with Minnie Pearl off of Heat Hall. They really grew up together. And they took me in and fed me every night, and took care of me and encouraged me, and just said, "You're going to make it here in Nashville. You're going to do fine." And one day they called Christmas, they put a telephone next to me, and they said, "Call your folks and tell them they've got nothing to worry about, because you just got adopted by Henry and Liz." Wow. And I was telling my wife, the people that made the biggest impact in my life were the ones who said, "I'm in." And she said, "Well, I think they knew how to do that, because they loved the God who did that to them first and said, I'm in." And they were just mirroring back to you what God had already done for them. And I said, "We should do that, And my wife, as I said during the show, my wife's like, "Well, I've been doing it for a while, but you can join me if you want to." And so it really was. My wife was like this, arms wide out, "I'm in." And I remember when she was filling out the form for a Chinese baby. My wife's a medical doctor. She's an OBGYN. She knew what all the terms meant. She knew what it meant to have, hey, would you take a baby without a finger? Would you take a baby without a hand? Would you take a baby with a heart defect? Would you take a baby with a cleft lip? Would you take a baby? And she's just marking yes to all those. And I'm like, with each one she's marking, my hands are just coming in like this. I'm just like doing the opposite. And I'm like, "You just don't have any idea, honey. You have no idea what your," and she just looked at me, and she's like, "Hey, are there things about you that you wish were different? That you wish, gosh, I wish that didn't happen. I wish I wasn't like that. I wish I wasn't like that, And she said, "Do you think God looks at you any different?" And just goes, "Well, he was in the club until I saw that defect in him. Now he's out." No, God just loves you. He just loves you. And so we met Maya May 2 years later from China, and she didn't have fingers on her left hand. And as I said during the show, I knew that was going to be a huge deal. I knew that was all I was going to think about. And I met her, and it was a huge deal for about 20 minutes. And then I haven't thought about it since. I have not thought about it since. And she's been when she was 2.5, 3 years old, she was the first kid that in her preschool class to put on her socks and her shoes. I mean, she's just a go-getter. She's she's unbelievable. And now I don't see her as a kid to adopt from China who has maybe a defect. I see her as my daughter, and she's perfect to me.
Amen.
And so I think there's a before and there's an after, and I've learned more. I hate this because I'm a creature of comfort, man. When I do a concert, my road manager always knows just to find the nearest Jimmy John's, because that's where I want to go, because it just is the same every single time. He's just like, not only that, I know you want Jimmy John's, and we're going to hit Starbucks after. I get it, and I know what you're going to get. You're going to get a number 3 at Jimmy John's every single time, and I'm just a creature of comfort. But what I'll say is the places where I've grown the most and the most important things have happened to me is when I've jumped outside my comfort zone. And I hate living outside my comfort zone, but the best things happen to me. I'll say, whether it's moving to Nashville, whether it's adopting my daughters, whether it's getting married, whether it's dreaming up the next thing, it's getting out of my comfort zone where all the magic happens. And so I would just tell people who are thinking about adoption, it's stepping out of your comfort zone, and it's just taking a chance. And once you take a chance, you go, well, how could it have been anything other than this, you know? And I remember there was a lady who adopted a few kids, and her husband, she came to a concert, and her husband had sent her a picture of, he said, honey, let's adopt one more. And she said, absolutely not. No more kids for us. And she came to my concert, and I walked out afterwards, and she was just standing there, and she was just looking at me. She had this look on her face, and she's just like, come here. And she shows me the picture like this, and she's just got tears running down her face. And she said, you did this. And I said, what did I do? And she said, we weren't going to adopt anymore. No, I just called them and said, we're bringing him home. So I was like, oh man, that's all. So for a song to go out and encourage people like that, to be brave, to be strong, to change a life like my parents did for me, and Henry and Liz did for me. My prayer is that we can be that for our girls as well.
Wow. Well, thank you for being all in. And after seeing you perform live and listening to you, I believe everyone needs to experience a concert with you. So I want to talk to you about performing, and I am trying to figure out ways to get you back to Pittsburgh.
Good.
Yeah, because everyone needs to hear you. But performing, you are not just your songs, but you performing. You're literally one of the best storytellers I've ever listened to. And I'm just curious, when it comes to storytelling, is that just natural? That naturally comes to you, or is that a skill that you actually had to hone? I see you're laughing.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I just remember. I think it's come pretty natural, but it's honed over the time too. My best friend from high school, he came to watch me. We had a show in California. I remember it was when I first started out. Was it Knott's Berry Farm or something? I forget. Anyway, he came to the show, and he was just sitting out there, and I could just see him sitting there watching me like this, and he was just shaking his head, and he had this huge smile on his face. And I said afterwards, I said, what's going on? And he said, the two things that you're doing right now, telling stories and singing behind a piano, have been the things you've been doing your whole life. Like I remember I used to go home for lunch. I ran track, and so I'd go home for lunch, and I'd have a salad with my mom, and because the eating a big lunch at school would just would make me sick. So at track practice, so I go home and I eat with my mom, but I would always notoriously be 5 to 10 to 15 minutes late coming back into class. And the teacher, after about the first week, was so mad the first week, and then just enjoyed the stories of why I was so late so much that he would say, hold on, let me just get comfortable here. When I'd walk in, he would stop class, he would get back in his chair, and he would put his feet up on the desk, and he would sit back there, and he'd go, okay, you can start. And I would just tell a story about why I was late. I would just make it up mostly. And by the time it was over with, he would just say, that was better than yesterday's story. And then we'd be on to the lesson, you know? And it's just, I don't know, it's just something that I love. And it's made its way into my songs, you know, to storytell inside my songs. And I don't know. So that's why I laugh when I think that, because I feel like I've been doing it my whole life. And now people just, you know, buy tickets to come see it is different.
Oh, and with that, what I think is so brilliant, like I'm just picturing when we were with you in November at the show. I think you sang Walking Her Home. I forget what song it was, but literally I looked to the left, and the couple who are good friends, I didn't know at the time, but his wife was pregnant. She's literally shaking, crying so hard at the impact of the song. And then I'm sure the whole room felt the same way. I mean, Laura and I were teary-eyed. And then you instantly switch it to humor. And literally we go from the motion of like bawling our eyes out to laughing. I mean, is that is that just intentional, or that's just more of who you are? It's absolutely brilliant because of how emotional your songs are.
Yeah,
I don't know how you do it. Yeah.
I think that's I'm both those people. So if we're hanging out, we're laughing. But if I'm putting my heart into a song, then it's like that's also part of me. But the thing is, if you're going to play those songs and you come back with kind of a very deep, sad story after that song right there, you're just gonna just run people into the ground. You know, they're just gonna be like, I can take 3 songs and I can't breathe anymore. You know. So, but the humor is just, that's fun for me. I love to play a song that I can see people feel. Then that's the magic of it. When I see somebody feel the same way that I did when I first wrote the song, and that after 15 or 20 years, they're still having that feeling that I had when I wrote the song, and it reminds me of that. But then to entertain and just to make people laugh and go, oh, and one person said, a long time ago, and I've always tried to do this, is he said, I feel like what you do is you take real life and turn it into art, you know, whether
Yes.
that's to make the stories to make people be inspired or cry or think, oh, I've never thought about that before, or to tell a story that's funny, taking life and turning it into art in some way and handing it back to people. And then people can see themselves in it. You know, if people are crying or they're laughing, they can see themselves in those situations.
Can you talk to, this could be young leaders, but in general, talk to young performers. You know, what would you tell the 20-year-old version of yourself, you know, that maybe is moving to Nashville, has a dream, you know, maybe doesn't have all the people believing in them? What would your advice be?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I got this advice from a country singer when I was a waiter in Nashville. And Willie Nelson said the same thing in an interview that I heard later on. But there was a country guy who had come to town, and his career was over and he was leaving, and he found out I was his waiter, and he found out I was leaving. And number one, he said, hey, I've had a good run here, but if I could leave one thing with you, he goes, I don't know if you'll ever be on stage or not, or if you are, this will be worth it for me just to tell you. He said, make sure when you perform a song, you never phone it in. Because if you're not feeling that song, the person in the seat out there is not going to feel the song. They're going to feel it less than you do. So you need to put everything you are into that song. And then the other thing is that I think is so important. I heard Willie Nelson say this. He said, when people ask me how to get into the music business, I just don't tell them, because I figure if they were meant to be in the music business, they're going to find a way to be in the music business. And for me, that is absolutely true. And I remember, I remember being at Kansas State, and I was reading a book on how to make it into the music business, you know, and it said, the number one rule, if you're reading this book, if you want to come to Nashville and get a record deal, don't come. Only 1% of the people who come to Nashville get a record deal. And I still remember looking at that going, I think I'm one of those guys. I think I'm in that 1%. I have no idea why I could even think that, but I just had like, man, I think I'm going to do that. And when I first came to Nashville at BMI, they listened to people's songs, and that's where I had an internship for free. And after 6 months, I finally got enough nerve to ask this guy who was a song plugger there to listen to my songs. And he listened to one, you get about halfway through, and he'd move on to the next one, get halfway through, move on to the next one. And I thought to myself, either things are going really, really well here, or they're not going well at all. And afterwards, he said, you know what? Your songs kind of get me. They're kind of like, half hook me in, but you're not a great singer, and you're not a great piano player, and you're not a great songwriter. I just don't know what's going to happen. And I remember sitting there thinking, man, I think I'm better than that. And I went to Barnes and Noble, and I picked up a book, How to Write a Hit Song. And I was working as a youth director at the time, and I sat and read it cover to cover. And I sat down, I went, oh, you know what? He was right. There's a lot of things that I'm doing wrong. And the first song I ever wrote was a song called When You Come Home. I wrote it for my mom. And that was the first song that I wrote right after I read that book. And I went back into the guy's office and I said, you're absolutely right. And I played him the song, and tears were running down his face. And he goes, you got it. And that was it. And so I think you find a way. I mean, if you're meant to do it, you find a way, and you're not discouraged when roadblocks come. You just go, just find a way to get it done.
Yeah. And by the way, this is totally personal, but is your mom still around?
My mom is still around.
Okay,
Yes.
I always laugh at the live stories and songs, because the last verse of that song, man, it always like, yeah, your mom's actually still alive, but everyone thinks she's dead. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I
it's fun
was
to
saying
follow
in
up.
the book, I was saying in the book, it says, man, if you're going to write a song, that third verse has got to be as strong as you can possibly get. And having my mom pass away at the end of that song was as strong as I could possibly get. I said, everybody is really excited about that except my mom, So I have to tell everybody at the end of the song, my mom's fine. She's really fine, but that's what the book said. So I had to follow.
It's so good to hear. If we have time, we'll go in the lightning round, but I want to finish focusing on generosity. And you mentioned that you raise money for orphans. You're also in the middle of, you had a goal of raising $1 million for pregnancy resource or crisis centers, which my understanding is you're over $2 million now or close to that, which is incredible. So almost doubled your goal. My wife and I, we've been just challenged in the area of generosity this year. And it was interesting. What we were praying, it's like, okay, God cares about the poor, the widow, and the orphan. And we feel like we're good on the giving in the poor area. And we're like, man, God, where do you want us to connect with orphans and widows? And, and then I was doing research for this interview and I saw the Remember Me Foundation. Can you just talk about giving back, but talk about the Remember Me Foundation. And if someone's listening to this and was impacted and wants to make a difference for orphans, what can we do? And how can we be a part of your foundation?
Yeah, well, two things. Number one, when I went on my bike ride across the country, my wife's, I said, man, I got to tell her what I'm thinking. And I said, honey, what if I rode my bike across the country and for 3 months, all the money that came in from that thing, we just gave away to orphans? And my wife she looks at me and she has tears coming down her face. And I was like, oh, that was a bad idea. Let me switch the subject. And I said, okay, what about we don't do that? No, she said, no. It's awesome. She said, I'm just sad that I can't go with you and do it. That seems like something would be so fun to do together. And she was at OBGYN residency, so she couldn't do it. And I thought, okay, well, number one, I'm married to the right person. I mean, she's got a huge heart. So I did that. And then after it was over with, and I came back and I said, that was the greatest thing that I've ever done. I mean, I just gave all the money away and we just sat in the kitchen on the floor. And I remember we were just sitting in the kitchen. I don't know why we're on the floor, but we were just so happy that we gave so much money away and nothing benefited us at all. And it was such a great feeling. And she said, you know what? She said, when can we do that again? And I said, hey, we didn't do that the first time. That was me by myself. And she said, we got to do something because you just can't let that feeling die and then go 20 years and go, oh, yeah, that was fun. And she said, why don't we start an organization where, maybe it's based off one of your songs, and it ended up being Remember Me. And we called it the Remember Me Mission. And so every year I would come out with a new project, whether it be a book or a new record or whatever. And anybody who bought that merchandise, all that money would go to the Remember Me Mission. And then she would disseminate that money out to orphan care and help mothers around the world. And it was a huge win for me because it kept me off my bike and having to ride my bike across the country again. So it's been really great. And my wife is really plugged in and knows the needs of, because maternal fetal medicine and has real ends to places. She's gone over and done mission trips around the world and over in Africa. And so she's really plugged into the people who are in need. And so she can plug that money into assets or into places where those assets will really help the communities. And so it's been awesome. And again, I think the biggest thing is, I tell my wife all the time, I thought the biggest thing in my life would be coming to Nashville and getting a record deal. After that, I was like, it can't get any better than that. That's like the greatest. And then it happened and I got there and I was looking off the top of the mountain. I was like, man, there's got to be more than this. It's got to, it's great. I love it, but there's got to be more. And the more was find other people who don't have a voice and be their voice. And so for me, that's been orphan care. And so, yeah, during COVID, I sometimes I'll just pick up the phone and I'll call a pregnancy center or a adoption agency. And I'll just say, hey, I was walking down the hall this morning when my daughter, who was 2 at the time, woke up and she pulls herself up over the crib and she goes, Dad, she lights up the whole room. And I'm like, I just called to tell you you're doing an awesome job and keep up doing what you're doing, because without your work, I wouldn't have the daughters that I have today. So thank you for number one, they're floored that I called and they're just like, you know what? Nobody calls us to tell us thank you. And I say, well, here's one person that's doing it because I'm grateful. So whenever my girls are having birthdays, I get on the phone and they start calling these organizations. I called some of them. They said, "Hey, we're having trouble keeping our doors open because COVID's. We can't hold our banquets or anything like that." And I told my wife, I said, "What if we just decide we're going to raise $1 million for those organizations?" And she said, "That's crazy because COVID's happened." And man, if we didn't go out and raise 2 million, and
Come
that
on.
feels
That's good.
so awesome.
Yes.
That feels so awesome. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. And thanks for everything you've done. With the few minutes we have left, I do want to ask about a platform. So, everyone comes to Nashville wanting to have a platform and wanting to be a star. You've gained influence, obviously, and have done well. What have you learned about the platform and the influence that, God has given you? Did you enjoy it as much as you thought you would? How do you steward that well? When people want your attention, want stuff from you, I'm just curious to hear you speak on that.
Yeah, I think here's what I think is really important. And looking back, when I said, "Hey, I'm going to come to Nashville and get a straight record deal, and I'll be on the road traveling, and it'll be really great." Two things pop out when you ask that question. The first thing is when my songs are on the radio and we're going to play these concerts, and there's 2,000 or 3,000 people there, and there's people saying, "Hey, can we get you a bottle of water? Can we get you a napkin? Can we get you?" Everybody was just
Jimmy John's. Yeah.
Yeah, can we get you Jimmy John's? I know
Come
you
on.
want a number 3. I know you want a number 3. So everybody was just coming out and giving, and I felt like, oh my gosh, I feel everybody's taking such good care of me. And you can get in the state where you can kind of feel like, oh, that's just how it is now. People just take care of me. The greatest thing for me early on was then to come back after a Saturday show, come back on Sunday morning and walk in, and Mark DeVries, the youth minister, would say, "Hey, Mark, glad you got here. Kid just threw up in the hallway. Can you go get the mop and clean that up, and then meet us down for the assembly?" And so you go from this, and I just always remember thinking to myself, I always want to be the guy who my kids in the youth group know. If they come out to a show somewhere, I never want them to say, "Oh, did you see the way he acted to that person? Did you see the way he treated that person? The way he's that's not the Mark Schultz that we know. That's not the youth minister, youth Mark Schultz that we know." And so that's just always stuck with me. It's important, to be grounded in that. And that was the greatest training I could have ever hoped to have, is to serve, but also to be the servant. And then the other thing that I learned is that I remember when my son was old enough, he was about 5 years old, and I was getting ready to go get on a bus. It was midnight, and when the buses in Nashville take off, and I was putting him to bed at 8 o'clock or something, at 7 o'clock. And he said, "Daddy, where are you going?" Because my kids still have no idea what I do. And they're 9, 7, 5, and 2. They got no idea. They're just like, one time my song came on the radio when they were like 3, and I was like, "Here's Dad's song on the radio." And I looked in the rearview mirror, and they were both asleep in the car. Anyway, I'm telling my son goodbye, and I'm saying, "Hey, Daddy's got to go, but I'll be back in a couple weeks." And he said, "Daddy, where are you going?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to go do some concerts." And he said, "What does that mean?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to go and encourage some families." And he just looked at me with this look at his face, and he goes, "Well, why don't you just stay home and encourage our family?" And I was like, oh my gosh. And you know what? That was the last time I got on a bus. And so what I realize now is time with my family is the most important thing. And my biggest calling is to be a great dad, and to go do shows and continue to do that as well. But as my wife says, if we get to be 20 years from now and we don't have a great family, we've missed it. We missed our calling. And so, so we try to do intentional time with our kids every day, 10 to 15 minutes, no matter what. Each kid gets 10 or 15 minutes, whatever they want to do, we do it. And I jump in, and I do it. And that time is investment and adds up. And I'm hopeful by the time they're in their 20s, they'll come home when they don't have to.
Oh, I know we need to wrap up, and I guess I'll just leave this open-ended. Is there anything else you want to talk about, or anything else you want to leave us with?
Gosh, I don't know. I think we're just learning so much as parents, and I know you give a lot of tools for people that are learning. My wife and I just started this thing called positive parenting. Positive parenting. Amy McCready is who teaches it, and positive parenting solutions. And gosh, it's been so great. Our family has just gotten so much tighter, and it's been really great. And I would encourage people to do that. And the last thing I would say is, we decided it's the new year. And I know everybody's seen this, but it's just made a huge impact. Our sermon a few Sundays ago was that idea. You've seen this, I'm sure, where they have the vase or the clear glass, and they put the rocks in, the big rocks, the medium rocks, and the small rocks. You've seen this, right?
Yeah.
And it just hit me. Oh my gosh, we're not putting our big rocks in, which are the most important things. We're letting hey, I'm checking my Instagram, or I'm checking Facebook, or I'm checking CNN, or whatever I'm looking at, and that's the sand, and the must do's is the next layer of bigger rocks. And then by the time it's time for the big rocks, like God and your family, you don't have room for them. You put the big rocks in first, and then you get everything. Everything else fits in. And so my wife was just saying, hey, it doesn't matter what's going on, whether I'm traveling or whether I'm here. We're getting on FaceTime, or we're here in the kitchen and we're reading the Bible, and then we're listening to how to be better parents. Those are the first things we're doing before anything else takes over the rest of the day. And I think when you put those things first, then God comes in and puts the rest of it together.
Well, I've loved this conversation. It was everything I hoped it would be. So thank you again for allowing this bucket list item to get crossed off. And thank you for who you are. More than anything else, thank you for being all in with what God's called you and your wife and your family to do. And thank you again, just for the impact that you've made on my family specifically. We spent a lot of time with you, just listening and just worshiping, and we're just very, very grateful for your ministry, Mark. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man. It's important work that you're doing. I love listening to your podcast, and I really am. I'm going back to podcast number 297 and listening about how to reframe and think about my last year. So it's important work you're doing. It was great to see you in Pittsburgh, and hopefully we'll get to see you again soon.
I love that. Thanks, Mark.